Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my rather belated November 2025 reading wrap-up video. If you're watching this near real time when I'm posting it, it's about halfway into December by this point, which leads me to the fact that I don't think I'll be returning to weekly reading videos this month. I'm rushing to keep on top of things, and the deadline's more static, it feels like, for December anyway, because I want to get all my 2025 reading accounted for as quickly as possible, whereas usually I allow myself to roll over maybe a little too far into the next month with my last month reading. So anyway, that's some housekeeping notes. Another one is that I talked in previous videos about how my video editing computer was dying, and it's gone now. All I can really do is slowly move things over to a functional computer, which takes time. So these are all things that I have in the back of my head when it comes to scheduling around and for video stuff. So it'll be a little less, but I'll definitely still be around this month, and I'll have a December reading wrap up in the new year. But first I will get back to the November reading wrap up. I actually did talk about a lot of these books, at least in passing, in my NaNoWriMo vlogs. Hoping to keep this short and sweet. It is actually just before the first night of Hanukkah, and I have plans tonight. So anyway, I have 8 books to share, and hopefully some, quick thoughts that might be able to help you gauge your interest in them. And so without further ado, let's get into it. The first book I read this month was a writing craft book, which I do for my NaNoWriMo months. This is The Art of Revision by Peter Ho Davies, which also seemed apropos because one of my major goals in November was to be editing revising my novel in progress. This is definitely a literary sort of book. There's not a whole lot of craft information in it from sort of a developmental angle, like if you're looking as a, novice reviser, what do you want to do to improve your project? There's a few little bits and pieces in here that could be helpful, but mostly it's a literary rumination on what it means to revise, even, beyond one person's author's scope of work, more like revision in general as well, which it's interesting if you're interested in the writing life and the writing culture, and there are, as I said, a couple of tidbits you can pick up along the way. The next book I listened to was Israel Alone by Henri Levy for a Israel book club I'm part of in my synagogue. It also counts for Nonfiction November, so that's something. This is a short and pointed book. It is in fact very polemic, so I do think that the scope of interest would probably be pretty limited. I skimmed some Goodreads reviews, and certainly some people were completely turned off and refused to, engage with the book at all. For me and my group, it worked as a jumping off point to talk about a lot of the trauma we've been experiencing since post-October 7th, and what we've seen from family and friends, both in Israel and at home. So it was useful to us, especially as a tool for furthering discussion amongst ourselves, but otherwise it probably will have limited appeal. Next, I have Mercury Pictures Presents by Anthony Marra, part of my page 112 TBR challenges to myself that I'm behind on, but hoping to catch up on, especially this month. Anyway, this book is historical fiction. It's a bit sprawling, but I'd say that the general gist of it, going by the title, follows Mercury Pictures, which is a fictional mid-20th century movie production house that's run by Art Feldman. The main character is his long-suffering assistant, Maria Lagana, who in the 40s is trying to move up the ranks to be a producer in a sexist society. She also has a backstory where she and her mother had to flee Italy because her father was an anti-fascist dissenter and is actually under house arrest back in Italy, and they communicate through letters until it abruptly stops. And then there are, other stories that go into her father's life in southern Italy, and we catch up with a young man who ultimately travels and escapes to the U.S. and meets up with Maria to give some updates on the father. And there's various other characters, other people who are part of the studio, and we get little backstories into them. To me, that was a little too sprawling and difficult to keep on track. The stuff that was most interesting to me especially happened because in the early 40s and in the 30s, Art Feldman, who can be a challenging character in and of himself, was also seen as an agitator because he was creating films that were critical of the Nazis and might jumpstart, like, you know, hint that the U.S. should enter the war, which was unpopular until Pearl Harbor. But what do you know, when one of his major films comes out, the next day Pearl Harbor happens, and then Art Feldman and his studio are seen in a completely different light. That's not entirely a positive thing, because they're also used for propaganda by the US government after that. And we are following a lot of the employees, including Maria, who are now labeled like enemy aliens because of where they were born, and how that impacts their lives in America. So there's a lot of immigrants in this story, and that's interesting to follow as well. But overall, I found the entire story to be a bit sprawling and difficult to grasp onto. Next, I read Where I Am by Dana Shem-Ur, which is a Raid the Shelves pick that I read from one of my major book hauls that I'm trying to whittle down. And this is a ruminative literary fiction novel about an Israeli translator living in France. The story is told in basically 3 parts. The first part's like a dinner party at home at France with her husband and his friends. Then it's in transit, and then finally she and her husband are invited to another party with friends in Italy. And in all of these sections, you just see how out of sorts the character is, and it is a rumination basically on what it means to sort of be an outsider and to be out of your culture and thrust into a new one. I would say that the plot elements are relatively thin until the very end, which I feel like the author did a disservice and did a very melodramatic plot that was kind of icky to try to like bring a sense of climax to the story at the very end, and it didn't necessarily feel earned. It's going to be a difficult novel overall, I think, for people to read, because, you know, it doesn't prioritize the plot and the story, and the character stuff is somewhat interesting, but it's difficult maybe to identify so much with these ideas that are more esoteric than explored, I feel like, through the full relationships with other people. I then was able to read one novella in this particular collection. I read this one, which is In Sickness and Health by Nora Gold. The other one, Yom Kippur in a Gym, is on the back, but I did not get to it this year. Hopefully I will next year for Novella November. I'm just, you know, check marking these things off right here. Anyway, In Sickness and in Health is another sort of ruminative piece about a woman who is dealing with chronic illness, and it's also told in parts that I think is to the book's detriment, and it's told in parts where one part is in second person, one part is in first person, one part is in third person, and it makes the thing much more disjointed than it has to be. I like the first part in second person the most, where you just get into her head about how difficult it is to have an illness that you can't explain, and you also have to contend, you know, with a job that, you know, won't just sit around for you, but also the feeling of just being useless in your life and how frustrating that is. And I thought that was the strongest part. And things devolved for me as we went further back in time, I think. First of all, we learned the character dealt with epilepsy, having epilepsy, and it felt like maybe that should have come up more in the first part then. And just in general, I just felt like I lost the gist of what worked for me best in the first part of the story. So yeah, this one also was a little disjointed for me. Moving back into audiobooks, first I'll talk about Space Brooms by A.R. Rodriguez. This was pretty much a last-minute addition to my TBR, which was highly unusual for me. Usually I plan a lot of things in advance. And for me, what happened is I was realizing, you know, I have a list of books per genre, front list books that I'm interested in reading, but one of the books I added to my science fiction list wasn't science fiction at all. And also, I was frustrated at myself that none of these science fiction books on my list were space opera, and I was just having a real hankering to read space opera. So I decided to nix the non-science fiction book from that list. I won't be putting it on resolutions to read next year or anything. And I read this book instead. I read it because I heard about it from a BookTubers TBR game. And it was the one that I could, get quickly and easily from the library. So I decided to give it a go. It's a little more lighthearted than my usual fare. And like it dives into just a lot of clout around knowing certain, properties and fandoms and that sort of thing. And that doesn't always, stick to me. Like that doesn't always ingratiate me in a story. But this is a story following Johnny. He is a space broom, or a very underappreciated janitor on a space station. He was running from his life on Luna, trying to find a better life for himself, which didn't really materialize. So it's a perfect time for him to get embroiled in this heist scheme where just it falls into his lap, kind of this chit of information, like for a video game or what have you, that's supposed to be very lucrative, and they're trying to sell it to the people who will pay them a lot of money. That is the people he comes into contact with, and they get on a ship together to go to Luna to make this transaction, and they have, some adventures along the way. For me, this heist stuff and adventure stuff, it's not usually the stuff that draws me in, and it took me a little while to get into the characters, but when I did, I could, feel the love. The thing that really, I think, draws a lot of readers into it is just the relationships between these characters and the ways that the other people on the ship draw Johnny out of himself and make him realize he has a lot to offer the world, even when things go badly for a little bit and he has to kind of start over back on home in Luna for a little bit, but then he, ultimately finds his way again. So I think this is a charming sort of feel-good book that would appeal to people who kind of like the heistiness and like the sci-fi space elements and could fall for these sorts of relationships. The next book I've read or listened to is my personal favorite of the month. This is We Would Never by Tova Mirvis. I actually did not mention this book at all in my nano vlogs, mostly because I read the majority of it in December, but I liked it so much that I want to count it as a November book because I needed a stronger win, I think, for my November reading. Tova Mirvis is an author who I've read a lot of before. In fact, I think one of the first videos I made on BookTube was like, my favorite author, Tova Mirvis sort of video. This is a bit of a departure for her and her first novel in a long time. She wrote some literary fiction novels, mostly about her experience in the modern Orthodox world in America. Then she wrote a memoir about her separation from her husband and leaving a lot of that world. And then this book, in some ways, is somewhat in line with some of that, but also very different. And it's based on a true story. And to get to the point, this is literary suspense, a literary crime novel, as you would, with heavy emphasis on the literary, because it's less about, following the police and the procedurals and, the trial or what have you. And it's about the immediacy of what the family members who committed this crime were going through and why they would make such horrendous choices. This is about a hire for murder scenario. Based on a true story that, happened to someone who was on like the outskirts of Mirvis's personal acquaintances. And then that real trial dragged through the news for a long time, and several people were ultimately convicted in the plot. But this story takes place much closer to the beginning of the event of when the murder was thought out and executed. Hopefully, pretty much, I believe, with slightly tweaked characters at least. Anyway, what we are following is a very contentious divorce, and I feel like this is where Mirvis's personal history did her a lot of justice, because, we could feel all of the anguish of this divorce that turns really really difficult for these people. The major characters we're following are the Marcus family. Haley is the young woman who is getting divorced, or her husband left her, and it's sort of like falling on her, and she's sort of the more passive person who has to put up with a more domineering husband and a more domineering family behind her, and there was a lot of clashes between her husband Jonah and her family. the major sticking point of the divorce is that Haley wants to move her young daughter back to Florida, where her family is, where Jonah wants to have the young daughter nearer to him in New York. So the divorce proceedings are dragging on, and it's just taking a humongous toll on Haley, who relies on her mother and her brother Nate especially for a lot of moral support. And for various reasons, they want to be there, step up for her as family. Sherry, the mother, is also somebody who can be quite domineering and maybe codependent is a good word, that she identifies herself too much as somebody who has to be a caretaker for her children. She's also dealing with a son who has estranged himself from her, so she feels that loss of one child. So she's on edge about losing another child, especially as it comes to light how much her son-in-law disliked her and is willing and able to use family tragedies against them in his desire to get what he wants out of the divorce. Frankly, to me, I thought that Jonah, the murder victim, did not come off as quite likable, so that some of the challenge for me was, remembering to take the, family members to criticize them a bit more. And as the story goes along and you just see how horrendous it is, what they're deciding to do, and, how self-centered they are in their desires, it's easy to criticize them as well, but... yeah, this is, it's a melodramatic sort of story, but I feel like Mirvis is really able to get in deep with these very complicated, flawed characters that are dealing with a situation that really gets out of hand for them. And for someone who also has, family skeletons in the closet, not quite as severe, but there are ways that my family members have, used old grievances and estranged ourselves from one another, and from a distance it seems ridiculous, you can get your way out of this, but then when you come in close you realize people just get stuck in the mire. And for me, I think I appreciated that about this story. I understood that these people got themselves stuck in the mire, even though they're situations are pretty unforgivable in some cases, or at least not unforgivable in the immediate future. There has to be some redemption work done, which is not necessarily the point of this novel. So yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I thought there was some meaty, existential issues that were really relatable and, immediate and tangible. And then we get the interiority of all this character work as well. So I was really glad to have this novel. I think it's the first one in a while where I could get this invested on these levels. So I appreciate it. And the final novel I read is COSELLA Wayne, or Will and Destiny, by Cora Wilburn. This I've had on my Goodreads to read shelf since October. It was kind of my Victober pick, but it's not really Victorian literature. This is in fact a novel that was serialized in spiritualist newspapers in 1860 and is now thought to be the first written Jewish American novel, which is pretty exciting, especially because it does deal with some pretty unique themes for the time, like the grueling realities of lower class people in urban cities trying to make their way in menial jobs, the second class realities for women, and also it makes a pretty strong case for how dogmatic religions, especially Judaism and to a lesser extent Christianity, can hold people back, and this very much is a polemic for spiritualism, and the characters in this thinly veiled autofiction book, probably the most fantastical parts have to do with the spiritualist elements of convening with ghosts and that sort of thing. But yeah, Cora Wilburn had a pretty fascinating life in and of herself. She traveled large parts of the world, which also comes into play in this novel a little bit. She was dragged there by her father, who was an unscrupulous merchant who was abusive to her and her mother. And so in this, it's like she's writing this revenge tale in a way where the father figure is actually a fake father who stole the main character, COSELLA Wayne, away from her real father. So there is that there's a better future definitely waiting in the wings for COSELLA Wayne, and arguably for Cora Wilburn, who made a big name for herself in the spiritualist community. And then later in life, she did rejoin Judaism and join the Reform movement, which frankly, I kind of wish that was the story on the page, because, you know, in this rather melodramatic and one-dimensional take on religions, I don't think Judaism didn't often come out looking that great, although there were some interesting ruminations on Yom Kippur and on, I think, reading of the Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot, but for the most part, all of this hampering on text study and dogma was seen as the enemy in this book and seen as narrowing people's perspectives to be hateful, whereas COSELLA Wayne is the moral authority who, frankly, as in, I think, a lot of literature from the 19th century, she still sounds as self-righteous and preening as the rest of them. There's a lot of changes when it comes to literature that have come about since this time. We value, I think, much more nuance and characterization and far less, well, frankly, polemical writing, I suppose it is. So there we have it. I feel like this was useful on an academic level to learn about the history of, you know, Jewish American fiction and American fiction. I think the writing could be, you know, there is a thickness to this 19th century writing, can be a barrier to entry, although I think the melodrama of it also kept me going along chapter by chapter. So yeah, take from that what you will if you'd like to pick a book like this up. This is, you know, a very new edition of a book that's not been widely read, but it's by a recently unearthed historical figure. And that about covers it for me now. Hopefully that's short and sweet. I can get some things done before, like, you know, this video, before I have to vamoose, because actually I am singing with this new choir and we're doing a Hanukkah Night 1 concert tonight, so I gotta get ready for that as well. And I hope all of your reading is going great as we are reaching the final few weeks of the year, frankly. I hope that you're wrapping things up the way that you want to. I will be back on this channel in the near future with my page 112 tag, where I'm adding another book to my December TBR. I have, in fact, already filmed it because I get so excited about these videos, so hopefully that'll be up soon. And yeah, in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.